The unforeseen encounter. The sun had barely risen on Earth when the first signs of the invasion appeared. The sky shimmered with a light that wasn't from any satellite or space station. It was unnatural. A fleet of ships, massive and unlike anything humanity had ever seen, descended upon Earth in a silent, predatory sweep. There were no warnings, no demands, just the sudden realization that humanity's time as the apex species was over. Across the globe, cities and military bases scrambled to respond. Earth had long since spread its influence beyond its own atmosphere, establishing colonies on distant planets, growing its technological prowess. But nothing prepared them for the Zeltor. The Zeltor were a race of cold, calculating predators, with armor as strong as diamond and weapons far more advanced than anything humanity could dream of. They were not invaders, as much as hunters. Earth was their new game preserve, and humans, it seemed, were the most prized trophies. General Elise Harper was one of the first to understand the gravity of the situation. She had been in her office at the Pentagon when the sirens began to wail. At first, there was confusion, glitches in the radar systems, military chatter about possible asteroids. But when the sky darkened and the ground rumbled with the arrival of what could only be described as monstrous craft, it became clear. The Earth was under attack. "We need to move now," Elise barked into the comms, snapping her officers to attention. Her heart raced, but her mind was sharp. She had led men and women into combat countless times, but this was different. This wasn't a battle for land or resources. This was survival, and humanity was ill-prepared. Minutes turned to hours as military units scrambled to deploy, only to face an alien force that seemed unstoppable. The Zeltor's ships hovered over Earth's major cities, releasing devastating energy blasts that obliterated buildings and military defenses. It was as if the planet had been struck by the wrath of an angry god, and humanity was powerless to stop it. Elise watched, horrified, as her men were cut down by a weapon they didn't understand, against an enemy they couldn't even begin to comprehend. The Zeltor made no effort to negotiate or communicate. They simply attacked with precision, their ships gliding through the skies, raking the Earth below with fiery destruction. In the chaos, a small resistance began to form. Civilians who had lost everything and soldiers who had nowhere left to fight but the streets. The survivors, battered and broken, gathered wherever they could, hoping for a sign of hope, some way to fight back. Dr. Theo Zhang, a scientist who had been working on human-alien relations for years, had a different perspective. "They're not here to conquer," he muttered, staring at his screens. "They're here to hunt." His voice trembled with disbelief as he analyzed the data. "They're treating us like prey." It took humanity too long to realize the truth. By the time the resistance had started organizing, entire continents were burning. Cities had fallen. The military, fractured and leaderless, couldn't hold ground. Earth had become the ultimate hunting ground for the Zeltor. The human race, once the hunter, had become the hunted. In the deep silence that followed the first wave of destruction, there was only one thought that echoed in the minds of the few who survived. We are not done yet. The Zeltor may have believed they had won, but they underestimated humanity's will to survive. And that mistake would cost them dearly. As the survivors fled into the shadows, Elise Harper's resolve hardened. The fight had only just begun. Blood and iron. The days following the invasion were a blur of chaos. Across the shattered remnants of Earth cities, pockets of humanity clung to life. Governments fell, military bases crumbled, and society's fabric was torn apart. Yet, in the midst of this devastation, something unexpected began to emerge. The survivors weren't just hiding, they were organizing. General Elise Harper had always been a leader, but now she found herself in a different kind of war, a war for survival, with no clear rules and no time to waste. She had been forced to abandon her military base in Washington, but she was far from defeated. Gathering the scattered remnants of Earth's armed forces, she began to form the first cells of what would become humanity's last hope, the Resistance. The first few weeks were a blur of makeshift training camps, salvaging weapons, and scrounging for supplies. Elise knew they couldn't rely on conventional tactics. The Zeltor had demonstrated devastating superiority in firepower, speed, and technology. But there was one thing the aliens hadn't accounted for: human ingenuity and the raw will to survive. Dr. Theo Zhang had become an unlikely ally in the struggle. Initially, he had been a researcher on human-alien interaction, but the invasion had forced him to apply his knowledge in ways he never imagined. Theo had begun experimenting with the remnants of the Zeltor technology, trying to reverse-engineer their weapons and find a weakness in their systems. "We have to hit them where it hurts," Theo said one day, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "They're too strong for us to face head-on, but they're overconfident. They underestimate our ability to adapt." The first breakthrough came when Theo discovered an anomaly in the Zeltor's communication systems. Their network, designed for precision and lethality, had a blind spot, vulnerabilities in the transmission frequencies that humans could exploit. It was not much, but it was a start. The Resistance now had a fighting chance. Using the data Theo uncovered, the Resistance began to strike back in small but strategic ways. They launched guerrilla attacks, targeting alien patrols, raiding supply depots, and striking their weak points with precision. Each victory, no matter how small, became a beacon of hope. The Zeltor were no longer unchallenged conquerors. They were now facing an opponent who could fight back. Elise's forces, though outnumbered and outgunned, used tactics that the Zeltor hadn't anticipated. They relied on speed, surprise, and an unyielding desire to survive. And it worked. The Resistance scored several victories, pushing the invaders back in isolated areas. It wasn't a full-scale war yet, but it was a start, a sign that humanity would not go down without a fight. The turning point came when a small group of Resistance fighters, under Elise's command, managed to capture a Zeltor commander during a raid on one of their outposts. It was a daring move, risky, but it paid off. The commander, despite his brutal appearance, had been stunned by humanity's ability to surprise him. The Resistance interrogated him, learning valuable insights into Zeltor tactics and weaknesses. As the alien forces began to realize that humans were no longer easy prey, they escalated their attacks, but so did humanity. The Resistance now had knowledge of the Zeltor strategies, and they used it to outsmart their once overconfident enemies. Every victory, no matter how small, fueled the Resistance's belief that humanity could fight its way back to the top. For the first time since the invasion began, Elise Harper stood before a group of ragtag survivors, their faces marked by dirt and blood. Her voice rang out strong, full of determination. "We may have been the prey, but no more. Now we hunt." The Resistance had found its spark. The hunt had begun. Rise of the Apex. The days turned into weeks, and the Resistance's success began to grow. What started as small, desperate strikes against the Zeltor had evolved into a full-fledged campaign. Humanity, once broken and scattered, now fought with a unified purpose: to reclaim their home and turn the tide of war. General Elise Harper had become a symbol of resilience, the face of humanity's defiance. In the heart of a hidden underground bunker, the Resistance leaders gathered. They were no longer just soldiers and scientists. They were the architects of humanity's survival. Dr. Theo Zhang had continued his work on deciphering Zeltor technology, and his latest breakthrough would change everything. "I found it," Theo said, his voice almost drowned out by the hum of the room's equipment. He tapped a few keys on his console, bringing up an image of a strange device. The Zeltor's power core. It's designed to be virtually indestructible, but I believe we can reverse engineer it. If we can figure out how to disrupt it, we'll have a weapon capable of disabling their entire fleet. The room fell silent as the implications of Theo's discovery set in. A weapon that could cripple the Zeltor? It was humanity's first real chance to hit back on a larger scale. Elise nodded, her mind already calculating the risks. "We need to move fast. If we wait too long, they'll adapt to our tactics. We have to hit them before they realize they're no longer the apex predators." The Resistance moved swiftly, drawing on every resource they could muster. Small, nimble teams of elite soldiers were formed, led by the most experienced commanders. Using the Zeltor's own technology, they began raiding alien supply lines and striking at weak points in their defensive network. Humanity's tactics were now almost impossible to predict: guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and shock attacks that left the aliens reeling. But even as the Resistance scored these victories, the Zeltor were not idle. Their arrogance had been their undoing, but now they were learning. Alien reinforcements began arriving, and the tide of battle shifted once more. The Zeltor's counterattacks were swift and brutal, punishing any resistance with overwhelming force. Yet, humanity adapted faster than they expected. It was clear that the aliens had underestimated the ingenuity of the human race. "We need more time," Theo said, his voice tight with frustration as the Resistance struggled to keep up with the increasing number of Zeltor forces. "I'm close, but I can't finish the modifications on the power core without." A loud bang from the bunker's entrance interrupted him. Elise and the others turned to see a young scout, his uniform tattered and covered in dirt, rushing in. "They're coming," he gasped, breathless. "A massive fleet. We need to evacuate. Now." The room erupted into chaos. The Zeltor were launching a full-scale assault on the Resistance's base of operations. It was the moment they had feared. Their enemy had finally realized just how much of a threat humanity had become. The Resistance's secret hideout, hidden deep underground, was about to be overrun. Elise clenched her jaw, refusing to show fear. "We hold them off," she said, her voice cold. "Theo, finish the weapon. We're going to make sure the Zeltor regret this." As the Resistance scrambled to prepare for the coming assault, Elise gathered her most trusted officers. "This is it," she said. "The time to be prey is over. Now, we're the apex predators. We fight for our planet, and we fight to win." The ground shook as the Zeltor ships began their descent, but humanity was no longer scrambling. They had learned, they had adapted, and they would no longer be hunted. It was time for the Resistance to take the fight to the enemy. No more running. Now they would hunt. The hunt begins. The sound of gunfire and explosions echoed through the underground bunker as the Zeltor forces descended upon it with unrelenting fury. The Resistance had prepared as best they could, but the sheer scale of the enemy's assault was overwhelming. Elise Harper stood at the heart of it all, her eyes scanning the situation, calculating their next move. "We hold the line," she shouted, rallying her soldiers. "Every inch counts. If they break through here, we lose everything." The Resistance had built its strength on knowledge. Knowledge of the Zeltor's weaknesses, their habits, and their technology. Now it was time to put that knowledge to use. While the Resistance's soldiers fought fiercely to keep the aliens at bay, Dr. Theo Zhang worked tirelessly in the control room, finishing his modifications to the weapon that could change everything. Elise's team had already infiltrated the Zeltor's main command center, a massive, heavily fortified ship hovering just outside the atmosphere. The plan was simple: strike at the heart of the Zeltor's operations and cripple their fleet from within. But execution was far from simple. It was a suicide mission. They were outnumbered, and the odds were stacked against them. But humanity's will had already proved stronger than any force the Zeltor had anticipated. "Elise, it's time." Theo's voice crackled through the comms. "The core is ready. We need you to trigger it from the surface." She nodded, even though Theo couldn't see her. "Understood. We're on our way." The Resistance forces had set up a makeshift strike team, ready to infiltrate the enemy command ship. They moved quickly, their training kicking in as they navigated the maze of broken hallways in the bunker and made their way to the surface. They were going to face the full brunt of a Zeltor attack, but they had no choice. This was the only way to disrupt the alien fleet before it could finish them off. As they ascended toward the surface, the ground shook again, and the air seemed to vibrate with the power of the alien ships overhead. The Zeltor were relentless. But humanity was relentless, too. "Stay sharp," Elise ordered, her voice low but commanding. "We go in hard and fast. We don't let them get their footing." They broke through the surface and emerged into the chaos of the battlefield. The Resistance's makeshift defenses had been torn apart, But the soldiers fought on, refusing to yield. Elise's team didn't stop. They pressed forward, moving with purpose and precision toward the Zeltor ship, which loomed like a dark shadow in the sky above. At the ship's entrance, a group of Zeltor soldiers awaited them, armored and deadly. There was no room for hesitation. Elise's team engaged, their rifles spitting fire as they moved with swift, practiced coordination. Each shot was calculated, each movement a dance of survival. They had come to do more than just survive. They had come to win. Inside the alien ship, chaos reigned. The resistance was outnumbered, but their heart was stronger than any army. As they moved deeper into the belly of the beast, Elise's mind raced. This was the moment. The Zeltor believed they were the hunters, but today, humanity would show them what it meant to be the apex predator. The heart of the command center was just ahead. The resistance fighters moved in sync, clearing the way as Elise and a small team of soldiers rushed to the control console. She pressed the button Theo had instructed her to activate. The weapon, a pulse of electromagnetic energy, surged through the Zeltor network, disabling their fleet's power cores in one devastating wave. The results were immediate. The Zeltor fleet began to falter, their ships losing power, floating helplessly in the vacuum of space. The alien invaders were stunned, disoriented by the sudden, overwhelming failure of their technology. Outside, the resistance fighters took advantage of the opening. With the Zeltor fleet in disarray, humanity's forces pressed the attack, their spirits bolstered by the victory. "This is it," Elise said, her voice rising with exhilaration. "Now we hunt." The tides had turned. The prey had become the predator. Humanity had survived the worst the universe could throw at them, and now they were fighting back with everything they had. The Zeltor had underestimated humanity's will to survive, and now they would face the full fury of an entire species fighting for its life. This was the moment when the balance shifted. The hunt had begun, and humanity was on the warpath.